Some U.S. senators want to keep you from being able to transport most reptiles between states. Coming up, we'll discuss some proposed amendments to the Lacey Act on Funkytown Exotics, Snakes, and the Law. Hi, I'm Ron Funk. With my wife Tara, we are Funkytown Exotics. We have been collecting and learning to breed ball pythons since March of 2020. However, in my day job, I'm also a lawyer, and I seem to have come to this hobby at a very interesting time for someone with my legal background. We're facing right now a lot of challenges to our ability to keep and breed and transport and ship reptiles. With my 25 years of experience as an appellate lawyer, coupled with my interest in reptiles, I hope to share, as part of the series, Snakes and the Law, some of the insights that I have into these legal challenges. Because you can't truly have a snake video without a snake, here's one of our breeding males, Lucky. And that name fits him. He is a wonderful breeder. He seems to lock every time. And our very first clutch is going to be his. He is a yellow belly, lesser, 100% het desert ghost who we bought from Honey Hill Reptiles. Our last episode was about the Lacey Act and the successful challenge to its interpretation and implementation, which was mounted by USARK. I touched very briefly during that episode about an amendment that has been proposed by Senators Rubio of Florida and Schatz of Hawaii. Now, here's the thing about the proposal that gives me some hope that it is going to die in committee, which is where it is right now. Both of the sponsoring senators are from states that are uniquely affected by invasive reptiles. Senator Rubio is from Florida, which is one of the few states where these large constrictors that seem to be the impetus of these things, like Burmese pythons, can actually survive. And Senator Schatz is from Hawaii, which has no native snakes and where snakes are entirely prohibited. So this is a case where a couple of senators with very specific localized interests are trying to change the law that would affect all of the states. It's a bit unfair on one hand, but also a little bit of an uphill battle for them as well, because it may be difficult to generate enough interest in this change among legislators from other states which are not so significantly affected by invasive reptiles. So this proposal by the senator from Florida and the senator from Hawaii would have effects far beyond their own states. For instance, if I in California shipped a reptile to a hobbyist in Nevada, the amendment would affect that. However, in going from California to Nevada, that snake would not come within 1,000 miles of either Florida or Hawaii. When Senators Rubio and Schatz introduced their amendment, Senator Rubio put on his website what I think is a very deceptive press release about what they're seeking to do. And this is one of the reasons you need to know this stuff so that you can challenge it on your own social media and with others among whom you have influence. If you're going to challenge misinformation, you have got to call it out, and you've got to call it out repeatedly. So the misinformation with this press release started in the very first sentence, where he said U.S. senators introduced the Lacey Act amendments of 2021 to address oversights in existing legal authority to prevent the importation of invasive species. There are no oversights in the existing legal authority. This was a case where a government agency was overreaching the authority that was given to it expressly by the legislature in expanding its intended reach of the law. This was the FWS getting its hand slapped for stretching the law beyond what it was intended. This was overreach, not oversight. The misinformation continued in the very next sentence. The legislation would correct the negative impacts of a 2017 D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decision, that's the USARK decision, that diminished the ability of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, to manage the establishment and spread of invasive species. The USARK's court win did nothing to diminish the authority of the FWS and its ability to manage invasive species. It limited them to the authority that was given to them by the statute. It corrected an overreach. It did not diminish any ability of FWS to do its job. This sort of misinformation is how a legislator hopes to gain support for a measure that is working to change the existing law in line with that senator's own specific interests or special interests of donors. They make it sound like you're simply correcting an error made by the courts. They're trying to fool other legislatures into believing that they're not changing the law, but they're merely pulling back fake restrictions that they claim have come to exist in the law.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
There are 3 changes being proposed to the Lacey Act that I think are significant. The first is the correction. It adds the phrase, transport between the states, into the language of the statute. I note here, there really isn't anything being corrected as the FWS would have you believe. This phrase had to be specifically added because it was not there before. You see the deceptiveness of this press release. The FWS was acting like there was something in the statute that really wasn't there, and they got caught by the court. The second change is a bit more subtle, and it's worded in a very confusing way. This is a change to the shipment clause. And essentially what it says is any animal that is now prohibited by the Lacey Act is still prohibited. But it adds as prohibited animals everything else. But any other non-native species would be prohibited to either be imported into the United States or to be transported among the United States unless one of 2 very specific exceptions occurs. This is a huge change. Under the existing language of the statute, the FWS has to take specific steps and do specific analyses to determine whether a species is invasive and should be added to the list, and then they have to add that species to the list. If they don't do anything about it and it is invasive, then it's essentially their fault. Under the new change, everything is automatically on that prohibited list. And if the FWS doesn't do their job and doesn't do anything, then nothing can come in and nothing can be transported. That's a huge change in the burden on the FWS. So under this proposal, the FWS's responsibility and burden is completely taken away. By doing nothing, the FWS can ensure that even species that are not actually factually injurious or invasive are prohibited. So with this proposal, the agency that was already slapped down for overreaching their authority is handed further overreach on a silver platter. The first of the 2 exceptions to the prohibition of non-native species under this proposal is for a species which in the year prior to the implementation of the proposed amendment, that species was imported into the United States or transported between states in more than minimum quantities. Vague, undefined terms like this are a problem. Here, after the FWS tried to take a clear provision and make it less clear so they could stretch their own interpretation of it, this proposed amendment seeks to make the statute even more unclear and more subject to interpretation by using some very vague and undefined terms. This is just handing the FWS more of an overreach. This would have a very chilling effect, I think, on the introduction of new species into the hobby. For instance, the Boelen's python is a spectacular python that is only in small quantities in the hobby right now due to, number one, not a lot of knowledge about its living conditions and breeding conditions, and two, the difficulty in breeding it. These same difficulties occurred with other species that are much more popular these days, such as the ball python, such as the reticulated python. If the FWS determined that in the year prior to the new amendment, the Boelen's python was not brought into the U.S. and not transported in more than minimal quantities, then it would be, according to the FWS, a prohibited invasive species, and its development in the hobby would be stopped. We might never get to breed and own Boelen's pythons. The other exception in the amendment is the creation of what we call a whitelist of non-prohibited species. And again, this requires specific action by FWS to add a species to the whitelist and change it from prohibited to non-prohibited. If there's a lack of urgency within FWS to add a species, then it's probably not going to be added. And so as a result of this, again, looking at the Boelen's python, unless the FWS felt some urgency or some need to add Boelen's python to the whitelist, then even someone in Wisconsin, where it is cold and where a Boelen's python that happened to escape could not survive and could not become injurious or invasive, that would still be prohibited. So where is the amendment now? It's been read twice on the floor of the Senate and has been assigned to a committee, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. The members of that committee are up on the screen, and I'll post a link in the description. The committee currently has 114 bills that have been referred to it during this session of Congress. To put that in perspective, during the last complete session of Congress, 2019 to 2020, the committee had 269 bills which were introduced and referred to the committee. Of those, 46 passed committee consideration, 14 passed in both chambers of Congress, and 13 were signed into law. That's about 5% of the total bills that were sent to the committee that ultimately were passed and signed by the president. In fact, most bills do die in committee, and that's what we hope will happen to this one. But if it doesn't, that could be very devastating to our hobby. Legislators have a responsibility to you, the citizens, and your livelihood and your pursuit of happiness. Government agencies are more removed and answer only to the current executive branch. So what can we do? Contact the committee members, particularly if any of them are from your home state. Let them know that this bill is poorly written and overbroad, and that it could have a devastating impact on a hobby or industry that generates tens of millions of dollars per year. Let them know it does much more than the drafters of the amendment claim that it does, and that it gives away way too much of the legislature's power to an administrative agency. If the voices against the bill right now, while it's in committee, are stronger than those in favor of it, that might be enough to cause key committee members to just let the bill die. When it's quiet, your voices will be heard much easier. Don't wait until this bill gains momentum. Let's kill it now. And if it dies in committee but is reintroduced in the next session of Congress, let's kill it then. And this is not a case of do what I say, but not what I do. I've taken my own advice, and I've emailed my own California Senator Alex Padilla and asked him to help this bill die in committee. I will put below in the description a copy of the email that I sent him in case you need some ideas on what to send to your own senator. Well, that's it for this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to help us get our message out to our fellow hobbyists and breeders. I will continue to make and publish these videos about the legal aspects of our hobby and try to share some of my experience and expertise with you. I want to help to foster understanding of the challenges that we face and help to share some of my enthusiasm both for our hobby and for challenging the legal difficulties we face, and especially to help support USARK in representing us.
I caught you a delicious bass. You want to play it?
If you need a friend, don't look to a stranger. You know in the end, I'll always be there. And when you're in doubt, and when you're in danger, take a look all around, and I'll be there. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of the right words to say. I know they don't sound the way I planned them to be, but if you wait around while I make you fall for me, I promise you I will. When your day is through, and so is your temper, you know what to do. I'll always be there. Sometimes if I shout, it's not what's intended. These words just come out, no cross to bear. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of the right words to say. I know they don't sound the way I planned them to be, but if you wait around while I make you fall for me, I promise you. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of the right words to say. I know they don't sound the way I planned them to be, and if I had to walk the world, I'd make you fall for me. I promise you I will. Gotta tell you, need to tell you, gotta tell you. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of the right